All right. Welcome back, everybody, to episode 11 of The Spark Show. Welcome back, our co-host, Cameron Collier.
Howdy.
Good to have you, Cam, as always. And I am your host, Spencer Parks. And today we are bringing you some updates, as promised, on the Iran peace deal that was promised by President Trump 2 weeks out. And yet here we are, second to last week of June, and we have a memorandum
of understanding
being signed, and it's being touted as a peace deal by Trump. First things that I kind of hear coming out of Trump's mouth are this is a peace deal that's going to strip Iran of their nuke capabilities, that they have an understanding with the United States that they are not going to pursue a nuclear program. Thoughts on that?
We'll see. I mean, it's always best to be skeptical about these things, not to get your hopes up, because you're dealing with irrational actors, in my opinion. But from their perspective, perfectly rational, because they just had a bunch of bombs dropped on their head. So how can they? There's got to be some ego issues going on. So we'll see.
Yeah, I have to say, from the guys that live in the country, maybe known as the greatest nation to ever exist in the world, the United States was a military superpower pretty much since World War II. We don't ever have bombs being dropped on our head. So we definitely come from sitting on this pretty big pedestal.
Yeah.
And I just don't know how Iran, my big question is, how do you go and tell your people that you've won the war between you and the United States after you've completely had the crap blown out of you?
Well, it's just keeping their coalition together, right? So that they can remain in power and that they don't have to deal with, an attempted overthrow, because there's already so much animosity in the country. So, I mean, you gotta save face somehow, and I don't think Trump really cares about that. He's like, whatever, say you won the war. I got all the warships. How's your Navy doing? How's your Air Force? But what the lefties over here will say, well, they got all their missiles, and well, I don't know how many they shot, and yeah, they hit some airplanes. We lost some airplanes, but did we lose any ships? No.
I think there's only one Navy whose vessels are sitting at the bottom of the ocean.
Yep.
And we know whose that is.
Exactly.
Yep. So there's 5 key points I wanted to touch on today, and I brought some notes just in case we forget those points. But 5 of the key things that we still are unsure about with this memorandum of understanding is, what is the enforcement mechanism going to be moving forward? So is the United States going to be the watchdog overseeing this agreement, which you would think, if we're the ones making the agreement, that we are going to have some sort of enforcement and involvement moving forward?
Mm-hmm.
What happens if Iran cheats, if they misbehave, which I think Trump has already come out and he's had all the reporters asking him that, which he says if they misbehave, then they're going to be going right back to dropping bombs on their head. Pretty self-explanatory on that one.
Yeah, and I think our, 49 Tomahawk missile barrage that he sent over, and after they reconstituted all of their, radar systems and everything, and deleted overnight. That was probably like they got us. They got us.
Well, when your annual military budget is, all right, so 1 trillion in annual spending for the military. So still a drop in the bucket when you're
Freedom,
talking billions.
baby.
America. Let's see here. Oh, here we go. What are financial incentives that are being offered to Iran? What is the financial relief that they're going to be getting from the U.S. pressure being released from them? And I think we've seen already that they've had $300 billion being released in assets that were basically seized by the United States and other allies. So they are essentially getting their economic production back in place, especially with oil production. We know that's one of the biggest economic producers for Iran is their oil production. And they essentially had that cut off since the naval blockade went into effect. So it'll be interesting to see what economic relief does for them, because we know once they get the money start flowing again, that's when the temperatures start rising.
Yep.
And last but not least, what we need to touch on, the big question of them all.
we'll leave that out there so we can,
touch back on them.
yeah, come back through.
All right. Well, this is the big one, and I think a lot of people are going, well, and I threw an X post out there about this yesterday. Who's going to be the first one to basically ruin this peace deal? Is it going to be Israel or is it going to be Iran? So what let's see. What role will Israel play moving forward?
Well, I mean, it just depends on how Trump can strong arm Netanyahu and show him who the real boss is. It's, and he's already, Trump's already positioned himself in the media. He's already criticizing Israel and he's putting them in their place. And what's interesting is if you see the polls of Donald Trump's approval rate in Israel right now, they're cratering. Well, why is that? Because he's pushing back and he's saying, no, no more. Enough is enough. And I think this comes back to what Trump's actually trying to achieve here is no more endless wars. Sometimes you have to conduct military operations to assert your dominance. It's a vector of control. And to that end, it's okay, now let's come back to the table. I showed you who was boss. I'm the boss. Now let's do business and let's get over this. And I think that's what the Abraham Accords is all about. And let's go back to what was the first point?
Real quick, I don't know if you caught it yesterday, but Trump was at the G7, and upon his arrival, he walks in and he lets everyone know over the microphone,
I'm the boss.
I'm the boss.
Yeah. And they all chuckle like, like, you bitch.
Yeah, and then you see behind closed doors, you've got, who's the Ukrainian president again? Zelensky and French President Macron talking behind closed doors on the hot mic about how they're going to tame President Trump and control him moving forward.
Yeah, right.
You guys are crazy.
I know, just the arrogance. I'm sorry. What is the left call Donald Trump? He's a narcissist. And okay, how you gonna tame that then, bud? You ain't taming it.
No.
I'll concede everything. He's a narcissist. He's obsessed with his own ego-driven image. Okay, well, you ain't taming that. So play ball.
Yep. Only way you're going to tame that is if you cowboy up.
Yeah, and what leverage? I mean, this is the thing about politics and power. It's all about leverage. So, I mean, coming back to the Iran thing, what did Donald Trump do? He established leverage because coming into it, it was like, what leverage did Iran have? Had a missile program, and he rendered it useless along with Israel, and he created that leverage. And then what was the next point? It was the Strait of Hormuz. And then what did he do? He choked out their export and import capabilities, creating more leverage. And then after that point, what did they do? Then they started going after all of Iran's accounts and wherever they were shuffling money. And then Scott Bessent started shutting it down, following the money trail. Where are you hiding this? And then boom, just more and more leverage.
That's it. So coming back to our notes here, who is going to be the enforcement mechanism moving forward?
Well, I think that's the Abraham Accords. That's the whole purpose of the Abraham Accords. It's Trump bringing together. It's like, think about it. Like, Israel has always been like the biggest contentious issue that, all these, like the Arabs can't stand the Persians and the Egyptians and, and the Jordanians and, and the Turks and all that and the Syrians. You still have strong nationalities that are fighting and bickering amongst each other, but they all hate Israel. So it's like if they can create a memorandum of understanding and acknowledging that Israel is here to stay, they have a right to exist. Now let's just get on with business. Enough of the funding terrorism and, and it's like, what I really like is, for all the people that, hate Zionism and all that good stuff. Well, the best thing that keeps the Zionists in power is constant conflict. So if you are able to end the conflicts with the other countries, then and establish the borders, now guess what? There is no greater Israel project. It's shut down. And then it's enforced by trade because it's what are you willing to lose at that point? Are you really willing to give up all of that economic viability, for the greater vanity project, you know? So it's like enough is enough. Get back to business, That's like enough with, to the river, to the sea, Palestine will be free. Like enough of your chants and, chanting for genocide. It's like get on with it, normalize relations so that violence can finally stop. That's like, guess what? You're never going to end the cycle of violence by, oh, it's his fault. No, it's his fault. I mean, we can always go back into history. I mean, I hear this debate now. It's going back to the Israelites and the Canaanites.
Oh boy.
You're like, guys, do we want to keep going further back? It's like, enough is enough. It's like, you are responsible for your generation. You're not responsible for past generations. Sorry. It's like enough of this blood guilt, this blood libel.
You're not responsible for the actions of our grandfathers.
Exactly. And
Right.
guess what? Your grandfathers forced their way in, created, reconstituted the country of Israel, fought a war over it, established dominance, yes, with the West. But guess what? Now there's a culture. Now multiple generations have been born. Enough is enough.
So curious, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Turkey, a couple of the other surrounding countries of this conflict have all suffered collateral damage from the war.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of praise about a memorandum of understanding, a peace deal taking place. Is this just celebration of business getting back to usual? Or is this, we want Iran back in play? We want them to get back to what they do, which is causing terror, at least over Israel. Because as you said, there's a lot of these players that really don't like Israel. And so is this like a catch-22, or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to have that, right? Because humans are humans and they, love to murder. I saw something going around on the internet. It was like the fourth person murdered the third person murdered the fourth person on earth. If you go back to, the book of Genesis, Cain and Abel. So sure, but that's where, what they've seen is it's bad for business. That's just like these ego fights, these tit for tats. I'm sorry, like Israel is a formidable nation, but so are these other nations. So is Iran, It's like, so at what point do we just come to an understanding that's like, hey, let's just put our guns down? And I think that was the purpose of taking out, the first string and second string of the Iranian leadership. And then it's like Trump let the third string, think that they could overpower and overcome if they, just rallied. And then he just showed them, with the latest round of airstrikes, said, no, dude, sorry. You can believe your own propaganda at your own peril. But no, when it comes to just that's why he's bringing business. It's about business. Let's just let's just make money and let's build up our nations.
This Iran war has had me deeply reflecting back on the early 2000s, 9/11, the Iraq war,
Yeah.
George W. and his campaign to not allow Iraq to have weapons of mass destruction,
Mm-hmm.
WMDs.
Yeah.
And essentially, when we're talking about Iran, when we're saying we don't want them to have new capabilities, that's essentially the same thing. That's
Mm-hmm.
a WMD. We don't want them to have nuclear capability. We don't want them to have weapons of mass destruction.
Of course.
And so kind of haunts me a little bit, when we're in these conflicts and we're kind of writing these campaigns out on similar verbiage or similar premise. Makes me wonder, is this just artificial inflation that's caused to the economy to cause some sort of shift in economics? Because that's essentially what happens when we go to war, is economics change. That's usually the driver behind all these mechanisms.
Well, I think it's a couple things, right? You have those in the Pentagon and all that back in the time where they had this plan of toppling the regimes of the Middle East, and eventually it was, Iran was the last one to go. I don't know what the reasoning for that was, But ultimately, I think it just has to do with energy and controlling energy. And I think it was about building a pipeline basically from what is that? The Sea of, is that the Persian Sea right there? Persian Gulf, right? So from the Persian Gulf up through Syria to, into Turkey, creating that pipeline. So I think that's where they wanted to control that. And then you can take down, I'm speculating, obviously. And then you have those that are like, oh, we're going to spread democracy. I don't know if that was a reasoning, or if it was more like we're going to pad our pockets, through Halliburton, the Dick Cheneys and all that sort of stuff, industrial war complex. I think there's a lot of things going on here. I think with Trump, ultimately, I think it's the bigger game, right? It's China, it's Russia, it's maintaining, reversing the trend of America in decline. What is he always saying? We were a dead country. So it's, how do you reverse this? Well, we know who's the rising power is. It's China. Well, I heard something yesterday. I don't, I'm not sure how true this is, but supposedly China was buying its oil from Iran. 95% or 80% of Iran's exports was going to China for somewhere around like $5 a barrel. That's some very cheap oil. And then what are they doing with that? Energy is king, right? That's how you build up your nation. Your military, your AI capabilities, all these sorts of things. So it's like Trump needed to cut that off. And one of the things that this intelligence officer was saying is like, this plan was built under Biden, so Trump's just the one that's in power executing the plan, according to his management. And obviously he agreed with what the Joint Chiefs of Staff, came up with, where it's like, hey, China's rising. We need to start chopping them down here. And I think ultimately that's the play. So, but, now you got to work with the public, and you got to stay consistent with your messaging, and which he has. And Iran is creating this, this nuclear umbrella. And, well, if, say, they did have nukes, well, that would just solidify China's position, because we wouldn't take the sanctions off of Iran, right? So then China would just continue to receive its extremely cheap oil and continue its military buildup and, economic buildup.
I want to ask a question, and this is going to lead up to how I think and why I think that the United States is going to be essentially the enforcement watchdog. Can you remind me of who was part of the coalition that created BRICS?
BRICS, what is that? Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa.
So those guys. And what essentially was the purpose of BRICS? Why was that created?
It's to counter the petrodollar and to bring down the petrodollar.
Okay, so interestingly enough, I was watching a interview between this world-renowned economist, Michael Werner, and Tucker Carlson yesterday. Been on the edge with Tucker lately, but nonetheless, he still interviews some great people, has some good conversations. And I was listening to this economist saying how we're definitely headed into potential crisis in the near future. That, obviously economies go into cycles. They can be slow, but eventually they do suffer crises. And when you look back on history, we saw the American dollar go from the gold standard, which was Nixon, and then changing over to the petrodollar. And essentially right now with these oil conflicts, like with Iran and controlling oil flow and production, this is the things that's causing the American dollar to fluctuate. We see it in gas prices. We see it in asset inflation. We see it in all sorts of aspects of our economy, that oil essentially causes the value of our dollar to go up and down. That is very much what our dollar is based off of right now. And so my thought is, well, if, I think that, oh man, I'm losing my train of thought, which is horrible because I was on a good one. Basically that America is going to continue being the watchdog in Iran because they want to control how the dollar in America is valued. And oil production coming out of Iran is where essentially, we get most of our oil production for the world. And so I think America is going to continue their involvement in Iran in order to control that valve. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, yeah, I'm sure, obviously you want to always control, the world's economic choke points. That's the Suez Canal, the Strait of Hormuz, the Panama Canal, and the Straits of Malacca. So absolutely, it's in our interest. That's why, like, when people are like, why are we even over there? That's why, because it controls so much of our, the global economy. So if you have a bunch of crazy lunatics that are controlling, 30% of the world's economic output, that kind of affects, there's big downstream effects for just the normal person and prices and stuff like that because we're in an interconnected, globalized trade system.
And
So,
my point back to BRICS was that what this economist was saying with Tucker was that essentially anybody who challenges the petrodollar, so essentially placing value on oil based on the American dollar, if anyone else in the world tries to trade or purchase or sell oil in anything other but the value of American currency, they essentially become a threat to the world economy, or at least to
hmm
the United States. And do we know what happens to those people when they do that?
what's that?
They get taken out. They get a bomb dropped straight on their head. And guess what? Right back to the American dollar.
Yep.
And so this is sort of the interesting, analysis that I saw happening. And I just thought like, wow, this is pretty interesting.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Like leading into this, you saw this whole thing, all this chatter about, the petrodollar's going to fail, the dollar's going to fail, over and over and over again. Trump took it seriously and he said, guess what we have that no one else has? We have the world's greatest military, and it's time that you actually start asserting yourself. Because we had feckless politicians that weren't willing to do that because it's against international law. It's against all this sort of might doesn't make right. Yes, it does. It absolutely makes right. How do you think all these empires are built? How do you think China's building its empire? You know what I mean? It's might makes right. And we don't live in a unipolar world anymore. This isn't 1990 where there is no, you know, equal that can cause harm to us. Now you have a multipolar world. You have this growing of the developing world, which was, in part by the globalists and their globalized system. What did China do? Yeah, absolutely. Come on in, invest. Give us all your intellectual property. Now look at now we're a peer, a near peer adversary or whatever these, terms are. And it's just like, so what do you got to do? You got to assert your dominance over these choke points. There's always bottlenecks. And that's the thing is like identifying bottlenecks and then either trying to alleviate them or asserting your control over them.
Well, it was just very interesting. I know we've discussed it before, but leading into the Iran war prior to it, we saw some military action happening, and there was still military action happening down in South America and Central America that people aren't very well aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes, the conflicts going on in Venezuela, basically taking the Panama Canal back from basically ownership from China, kicking
Mm-hmm.
them out, giving them the boot, and the United States taking over oil production going on in Venezuela.
Yeah.
And so there were these sort of 4D chess pieces all coming together, regime changes, oil production being exchanged hands, things that used to be ran the American way that through the Biden administration and others was sort of relinquished out of our hands.
Well, you got to go all the way back to Richard Nixon. That's when this whole system started. It's globalized currency. It's the central banks. The Bank of England, the Bank of Canada, the Federal Reserve, like they're all in cahoots with each other, and they manipulate capital markets with terrorism. With think about terrorism. What does that do? That puts a premium on the price. What is that? It's a tax. It's a de facto tax, right? Pino Navarro was talking about this. So it's like if you want to bring down these costs and all that, then you need to take all these things out, the banks where are these cartels putting their money, where are they washing their money, you think they're not using, the, what's it called? The globalized banking system. Of course they are. And you think the bankers don't know about it. And you think, the CIA and MI6 and all these guys don't know about this. Of course they do. They're probably getting a cut of it, and that's part of where their black ops, operating budgets come from. So it's like you have to set all this stuff. You got to clear the chessboard of all these players before you make the big move, and the big move is Iran. So, how do we avoid $200 barrel of oil? Well, we open up production in Venezuela, and then we opened up our own domestic production, and Trump proved. So now all these buyers have a safer and more, what's the word, consistent place to buy, marketplace to buy their oil from, where it's not always under threat of what Iran's going to do. Are they going to drop? Are they going to increase my premiums because they're going to start doing some terrorist activities, mining the strait, all that sort of stuff? So that's what Trump established. And then that was another point of leverage where the Iranians said, "Oh, we just gotta get that oil to $200, and this guy will back off." And well, Trump already was ahead of that.
Absolutely. Now, let's move forward to our next point. What if Iran cheats this deal, this memorandum of understanding? Is a memorandum of understanding enough to stop the Islamic Caliphate in Iran?
Well, I mean, if they think that they got rid of the ideological, actors, the ones that were bent, on that end or bent to that end. So, I mean, it just comes down to who holds the power, the levers of control in Iran. So it's one of these things where you don't necessarily need regime change, but you have to identify those actors that are more rational, that don't really care about that, and back them so that they can seize control over the ideologues that, want to go on a world dominating tour, which is, I mean, doesn't even make sense. Like who do you think China is, Russia, it's going to go along with stuff like that? Of course not. They have their own interests. So it just comes down to getting rid of the ideologues, and I think that's what they did. I think that's who they targeted, and then it's like they come to the other guys that may be on the fence, and it's like, let's normalize relations. Enough of this. Like, yeah, we just beat the shit out of you. It's like a UFC fight when some guy gets, beat to hell,
Yeah.
and then they hug it out afterwards.
Like, you want to go 7 rounds, 9 rounds? What do you want to do?
I know, we can keep going all day long, dude. Or, you can come to the table and we'll go, have a beer.
Yeah. So, is Iran going to behave moving forward is the big question. And, all we have in place, we don't have a peace deal. We have a memorandum of understanding to negotiate no nuclear capabilities. And that's still in writing. That we still have another 60 days to go on this. This is essentially 60 more days of the same.
Well, but let's think about who brought the Iranians to the table. Who did most of the negotiating? That's Pakistan, that's Qatar, that's, these people. So what are they saying to Iran? Like, hey, like Trump wants to do business. He wants to do business. Like, enough. Let's open up. Let's normalize. Let's get you back on to the, the global system, trade system. No more sanctions. And let's start acting like a normal country, not a terrorist, hub. Or a hub for manufacturing terrorism. Let's actually build up the Persian people and let the Persian people thrive. They're incredibly intelligent. They have a lot to offer the world besides exporting missile systems and terrorist proxies. So it's like, enough's enough.
So you think pretty good chances that Iran will adhere to this memorandum? This understanding.
Yeah, I mean, what did Trump say? It's like, okay, we can just go back to dropping bombs on you. You don't have, look at you reconstituted everything. We gave you, how long was the ceasefire? 2 months, 60 days or something like that? And then what did they do? They were shooting missiles and they were looking all big and strong and all that. And then overnight, Trump just deleted them. So it's like, sorry, guys, you don't have that control that you think you have. Like we can do this tit for tat all day long until you have nothing left, and Trump established he doesn't care about, he's looking at the greater good for America and the greater good for humanity. Not, he's not thinking in election cycles. That's what's different about Trump is he's not like these normal American politicians where it's like, once you're basically back on the trail after a few weeks in Congress, you know?
Yep. My biggest thing is I just don't know if Iran can respect freedom of religion. That's my biggest thing. I think that Islam is just this on this conquest to destroy, and especially Israelis living so close in proximity. That's why we see just missiles flying over the borders and constant conflict, because that is essentially what the Islamic Caliphate is they want to seek out and destroy the opposition.
Well, this gets down to the conspiracy theories of, you know, who's actually control, like who put the Islamic, what is it?
Islamic Republic of Iran.
Yeah, the Revolutionary Guard. Who put them into power? You know, Khomeini and all that. And then who constituted Israel, right? Well, that was Britain. You know, that's the city of London. That's these guys. Like, who controlled the Middle East, you know, before World War II? England. You know, the UK, the United Kingdom, that was part of their empire. And then that's how they were able to create Israel, was because they controlled it. And then they got a UN resolution and all that and that good stuff. And then America's military is what enforced everything. But then you're like, you know, America always gets blamed for, you know, bringing in the Iranians in 1970. And that's partially true from everything that I've seen. And it was like, no, it's Henry Kissinger, who's the lead American, that was responsible for that. And it's sort of an open secret that Henry Kissinger reported to England before he reported to the president of the United States. So he was just the man controlling the puppet strings of the United States. And with that power, they were able to overthrow the Shah and all that good stuff, and then install these people. I think same thing with like the Muslim Brotherhood. Like, England is responsible because they want to control these capital markets, you know, speculation and premiums and all that good stuff, by always having these threats of, you know, these extremists always coming after them. You know, it's like you put these people into power, and then they're always fighting, and then guess what? The greater power just gets to exploit the chaos that ensues.
Absolutely. And so let's just assume that Iran decides to comply with this agreement, and they decide we're going to walk back military strategy and, you know, completely flying missiles over to Israel or wherever else and causing chaos here in the Middle East. Who is then going to verify compliance about no nukes and no pursuit of nuclear capabilities?
Well, I think that's just like you know, whatever the actual institution that we already have that's established that does that through the UN. You know, what is it called? I can't remember what the actual name is of, like the nuclear committee or whatever that actually comes in. But we also have satellites that are watching. You know what I mean? Like, we knew exactly where it was, what was going on. We have spies, we have all that stuff. And it's like, well, what would Iran rather have? Would they rather become a pariah state like they were, or would they like to come back into the international community? You know, it's like I don't know. If you're a rational being, you're like, okay, well, we can constantly be under threat of assassination. We can constantly be under threat of missiles being dropped on our heads, or we can just get back to doing normal economic activities. Obviously, you know, you can reconstitute your military defense capabilities and all that sort of stuff. You know, that's not a big deal. But no more nuclear proliferation. We have enough of it. And, you know, let's get on with life.
Absolutely. Speaking of compliance, I think it's something that needs to be applauded on Trump's behalf, is that he was able to not only bring Iran to the deal on an agreement here, but he was simultaneously able to fend off Russia and China from becoming attack dogs in this war, which that was something that Obama and his predecessors were never capable of doing. And so I think there needs to be an appreciation here for Trump and his art of the deal, per se, in making sure that these other world superpowers didn't jump in and create a bigger problem for the world economy and for the world in general.
Well, I think Venezuela helped a lot with that, because all these super systems that they built, missile defense and all that sort of stuff, if you actually look, I think there was the guy's name's John Mersheimer or something like that. He's kind of like one of these think tank guys that kind of thinks about these sorts of things. And he was saying that, the United States has no capability to get to even touch Maduro. It's absolutely impossible for us. Well, we did it, and we did it in spectacular fashion without losing zero casualties. So, and we overcame all of Russia's best hardware, China's best hardware. So I think that was kind of like, then obviously the Ukraine war that's got Russia tied up right now. Russia can't afford another war going on. And then China, is it really in China's interest to get involved in what is like a third of their oil imports? So they're like, eh.
It's really interesting, China, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and they are very strategic
Oh yeah.
in their placement in the world. And we rarely see Chinese military going into open conflict with anybody. Makes you wonder, are they waiting for something?
Or are they a paper tiger?
What are they?
Um, I don't know. Who knows?
We see Russia in
Who
the
knows?
open conflict with Ukraine, so we see that they're an aggressor. We see that they act with open hostility.
Mm-hmm.
Um, China though, yeah, sleeper. We just don't know, sleeping giant for sure.
Yeah.
It's a big working partner of the United States. As you know, they hold a lot of our
Debt.
debt, and own a lot of American assets. So definitely a lot of leverage there. Um, Interesting just to see how things play out. It's interesting to see how they were pretty easy on relinquishing their responsibilities in the Panama Canal back to Trump. Um, I'm just not very sure about China. Appreciate them because, they do a lot of manufacturing for the United States, but also at the same time, they kind of work in darkness.
Yeah, I think it's more so like expression, like they express themselves kind of through soft power, through infrastructure power. I think the Belt and Road Initiative and stuff like that, which you know, was going places. But then people were finding out about, all of a sudden you can't pay. They're kind of exploiting people and then taking the assets from themselves. And now they just have a foothold in these countries strategically around the world. But I don't know. There was you had a few more points that,
Fifth and final point,
okay,
Israel.
Israel.
Yeah, the big one. I think a lot of, America first, um, you know,
What?
proponents are, very skeptical
Mm-hmm.
that Trump is beholden to Israel. But I think that with the agreement coming into place and Netanyahu lashing back out and
Mm-hmm.
uh, operating still in Lebanon against the will of Iran in their request, and sort of causing some issues early on here as we approach this agreement, this memorandum of understanding, that Trump has had enough. He's been willing to step in as an ally, but we're also going to start seeing that Trump is not going to start acting or continue acting on behalf of Israel if Netanyahu is not willing to comply with these agreements as well.
Well, I think Trump knows exactly who Netanyahu is. Let's think back to the 2020 election. Netanyahu was like one of the first persons to congratulate Joe Biden, which, you know, angered Donald Trump because I think it was like within 24 hours or 48 hours or something. It was super quick and obviously very contentious election. So he knows that, who Netanyahu is. He's perfectly aware. But that's how Trump is. He doesn't, it's not like this. He doesn't live in this word virtue signaling world where it's like, oh no, that person's an evil dictator. You can't do business with them. And it's like, well, in reality, you have to, right? They're a leader of a country, and they're a leader of our strongest military ally in the region, which expresses our control over the things like the Straits of Hormuz, the Suez Canal. So we need Israel for that, for those strategic purposes. And it's like, so yeah, he's going to do business with them. He's going to deal with them. but then he's got to create the leverage over him, right? So what did he do? He created sort of this shell of protection around Netanyahu. Netanyahu was feeling real comfortable. Well, now he's taking that shell of protection away and he's saying, well, if you don't do business, you know, you no longer have the United States backing you up. And you need, I mean, he says it over and over again, Israel would have been wiped out, this, that, and the other. So I think that's how he keeps him in line, is he shows him who the true boss is. Netanyahu was feeling comfortable. Like you saw those clips that the America Firsters, you know, the anti-Zionist guys are putting around where look at Netanyahu talking about how he controls Trump. Or Trump was letting him think that, you know, this Trump, you know, for as dumb as he can sound sometimes, he understands power and leverage. And sometimes when you allow someone to think they're in a position they're really not, and then you rug pull them, that's the best place to be because now they're on a back foot and you got them right where you want them. And that's how he does deals. That's what he's been doing. And yeah, you know, it makes people angry. You know, the lefties are all about, oh, our allies they don't like us anymore. And our reputation around the world is, what reputation then would we have that we were a bunch of pussies that didn't back anything up because we had a bunch of politicians that wanted to be everyone's friend and go to the cocktail party, you know? Praise in the media. Sorry, go ahead.
It makes you wonder what's inside this agreement because we see Trump being a skeptic of Netanyahu, saying, like, calling him out. Hey, knock it off with the attacks in Lebanon. We're trying to come to an agreement. We need you to settle down.
Why you taking down apartment buildings, do a precision strikes, things like that?
You're in non-compliance. And then, you know, Netanyahu barks back, says, we're not, you know.
We're not bound to the United States. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. How do you like our military?
But so, you know, it's like, I wonder, is there a little bit of political theater? Because is there something in this agreement, since, you know, Israel's not bound by the agreement with, you know, U.S. and Iran? Like, is there nothing in here that says, like, you know, Israel will not attack you and you will not attack Israel? Because Trump says if, you know, you're not compliant or you don't behave to Iran, that we're just going to go back to dropping bombs on you, to which then I think, well, that just benefits Israel. And then it makes, you know, Netanyahu think, oh, well, you know, they are not compliant, or if we can agitate them to be non-compliant, then the United States will just be coming right back in here.
I would assume, okay, well, one of the things that I heard J.D. Vance saying is now we're actually talking directly to the leadership, no longer sort of through these back channels and stuff like that. So I would imagine that they're just speaking frankly about, you know, none of this diplomatic kind of like cloak and dagger sort of like, it's just like, no, here's just the reality on the ground. Like we're just going to speak in plain terms here of what's going on and what I want to accomplish and what I'm sick and tired of. You know, maybe Trump said that to him, like, no more of this endless war nonsense. Let's normalize everything, normalize all these relations with all these neighbors, no more conflict, and let's do business.
Yeah, no more diplomats involved with their, you know, third line of, you know, telephone going in and getting the word. You know, Trump probably got the leader of Iran's telephone number, telling him to call his cell and let's work this thing out.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the best way to do business, right? It's like, let's just do business. You know, he's ready to build a Trump Tower in Tehran, you know?
Yep. And so overall, what are our final thoughts on the conclusion of this Iran war? Was it worth it? Was it not worth it? Do we think that we're going to continue to see historic conflict in the Middle East? Is this going to actually be something that sets a precedent moving forward in the Middle East, or are we going to see more of the same?
Well, I mean, I ain't Nostradamus, but I'm hoping, you know, we're praying for peace in the Middle East. We pray it every Sunday, and probably should be praying it every day, all day.
Yeah.
But no, it's one of those things where, you know, Trump seems extremely confident, and I put a lot of, well, I don't know if I say I put a lot of trust in Trump. I put a lot of trust in his abilities, you know, and the way he asserts himself. Yeah, he rubs people wrong a lot, but then he kind of has this good cop, bad cop sort of thing, and he tries to bring people back in, and then he woos them with his, you know, charisma and stuff like that. 'Cause you hear that all the time, you know. Like Bill Maher went to the White House and had dinner, and was like, oh yeah, behind closed doors, he's a totally different person than, this persona that he puts on. So who knows? Maybe he's going to have some big grand ball that he throws for the Iranians. And then
Could you imagine the
the
heads of the liberals
oh
if
yeah,
he invited
everyone's
the
heads
Iranian
are going to
regime into the
explode.
grand ballroom that he's creating?
Yeah, exactly. And it's well, that's the port. This is how business has always been done amongst countries for centuries and centuries, and it's only this delusional liberal idea where everyone's in these gray suits and they're all these bureaucrats that come together and no more kings and queens and all that sort of stuff, and it's just like
It reminds me, we were just talking about the new Odyssey movie just before we started, and it reminds me of the Greeks and the Trojans being at open conflict for many thousands of years and whatnot, and or hundreds of years. And when they finally come to a peace agreement, they come together in their great dining halls, and they
yeah, and they
enjoy
party.
wine, and they enjoy food and feast, and
Yeah,
they celebrate, and
and
they
that damn prince couldn't keep his prick in his pants.
yeah, well, let's just hope that nothing like that goes down in the grand ballroom when Iran's finally invited in for a nice feast
Yeah,
and
yeah,
some
exactly.
drinks. So,
But
uh,
one thing I wanted to end on is I wanted to talk about, this World Cup going on and these people getting a fresh perspective on the United States.
yeah, well, for too long, the display of American strength has been in
Undermined.
essentially, yeah, undermined, but it's been propagandized through fifth generation warfare domestically. We've seen
Just,
essentially,
yeah, the globalized media, the globalized liberal media that basically wanted America's role to be muted. And so this global system could kind of emerge from it, and where it was just like there are no borders, there are no nations, it's just institutions that control the world.
the manipulation of Western ideology.
Yeah, and it's just like, when you have 95% negative coverage, of course that has an effect on people's perspectives. It's the same thing with Donald Trump. He gets 95% negative attention. It's I was just seeing a headline from MS Now, and what were they talking about? They were talking about the reflecting pool is green and it's puke green and it's disgusting, and it's just like Trump's $14 million renovation failed, and it's just like, okay, well, the purpose of the renovation was to stop the leaking happening, to clean it out. And yeah, they have to deal with algae blooms in summer in Washington, D.C. It's a fact. And it's
We've
like,
all got pool guys.
yeah, exactly. And it's like one of these things where it's just like, it's always negative. It doesn't matter that he fixed the reflecting pool. It's no longer leaking. He put, he painted. It was like, it wasn't a painting,
Coating.
it was an actual polyurethane coating or whatever the dang thing is called. And it's just like, so, it's always negative, always negative, always negative. And it's just not reality. It's just like Trump is not 95% negative. He could be 50-51. He could be 45-55.
Well, I shared with you the survey that the Daily Caller put out yesterday or 2 days ago, and it said, what percentage of Americans are proud to be Americans? What a demoralizing survey to see. Republicans, thank the Lord,
89?
81%
81%?
Republicans proud
Okay.
to be Americans.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. What do we call the Green Party? 52%, 51% proud to be American, right in the center as
You mean
expected.
independent?
Independent. I'm sorry. Yep.
Okay.
And then our Democrat friends, 30%, 31% proud to be American.
I know they've been so demoralized because everything they watch is negative. It's negative, it's negative, and it's negative. And it's like, you guys are in a cult. I'm sorry. Like, it's like Democrats do good things. Democrats do bad things. Republicans do good things. Republicans do bad things. We're human beings. We do good things, we do bad things, we make mistakes. You know what I mean? So it's like, pull your head out of your ass. Enough is enough, dude. It's just like, go drive up, Grove Park here, and you'll see a guy who clearly watches MS Now because he's got all his signs up, 86-47. Are you done with Trump? Trump is a felon. I mean, it's like, Oh my gosh. I mean, if you can't see the best is when they talk about the weaponization of the DOJ and Trump's weaponizing the DOJ to go after his political opponents. It's like, did we not just live through 2020 through 2024 where they weaponized it against Donald Trump at all costs to stop him from running?
Well, if you haven't, I think I shared with you as well, but Gavin Newsom's under investigation along with his wife
Oh, he's
from the
got his
DOJ.
panties a twist. And
But hold on, this gets ripe. This gets
Yep.
really ripe. Claims that Donald Trump is doing this,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
This investigation was opened in 2022 under Joe Biden.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay, so this is not a weaponization of
And
the DOJ.
it started in the state of California, in Sacramento, after whistleblowers were blowing the whistle on self-dealing long before anyone in Washington, D.C. took an interest into it. So, of course, they're going to spin it MS now. And I mean, they're just pure propagandists, and then, Fox News is a bunch of propagandists. You think Republicans don't know that? That's why Republicans also listen. If you look at, surveys on how much, like who listens to what, it's like Republicans will listen to like 20 to 30% left-wing sources, and then the remainder will be their right-wing sources. Well, guess what it is for Democrats? It's like 95, where they're 90% only listening to their echo chamber and maybe 5% are listening. And that's probably just the journalists. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so kind of just wrapping it up. Looks like masculinity's in, toxic femininity's out, suicidal empathy is certainly out. No one wants to take part in that.
Yeah, no.
And
no.
America's back.
I know that the Europeans that are coming over with the World Cup, they're loving Americana. You see all these videos popping up. You got the Scots drinking Boston Dry, and they're showing Americans how you can actually party without tearing up your freaking city, New York. It's insane.
It's just, it's sad, but it just goes to show what, progressive leftist policy will do when there's a
Burn it down.
lack of law enforcement presence and a lack of wanting to support your law enforcement when all you do is you push to your constituents that you want to defund these institutions.
Well, you want to be a good guy. No one wants to be the enforcer. No one wants to be the bad cop,
Well, that's a great point. And, J.D. Vance actually did something bad in my eyes. He went on The View. But you know what? You have to do good things and you have to do bad things.
Yeah, you have to reach across and you have to show these people that you're not the evil boogie Nazi, Islamophobe, xenophobe.
Right. And as Whoopi Goldberg and all the other women on The View tried to push on J.D. Vance that black history is being, stripped away from, museums and from black culture and, people are being taken away and stripped of their families and put in ICE detention.
Super hyperbolic, yep.
J.D. comes in with a very calm and collected, response. And he's just saying, enforcing our immigration laws and the law in general sometimes is not a pretty business. It usually comes down to just having to do things that aren't very nice, but we have to do it. And sometimes ugly things happen. Mm-hmm. And he's just asking, in regards to Black history being erased and all this other stuff, like, what are you talking about? We're not ripping down statues or things like that and erasing history like a certain party that we watched do it over the last 4 years of Joe Biden.
Exactly.
But let's end this madness. Let's reach across the aisle. Let's have casual, good conversation. Let's discuss these issues as they come. Let's not just propagandize, opinions, and have good conversation and realize we're all part of the same America, same party. We all want the same thing. We want to live in peace, happiness. We want liberty.
And then, the best part about it is there's absolutely an organized force that's, these aren't like organic uprisings, the Antifa and all that sort of stuff. And I think James O'Keefe just released an expose showing that Antifa is actually an organization. It's not just an idea, as the left tries to tell you. They are organized, and these people are in positions of power within, there was engineers in T-Mobile and OpenAI and, all these, and then all these other anti-racism, the ACLU, all this good stuff. But we can talk about that next time.
Absolutely. Chaos is a, big theme in the United States lately. And there's only certain parties or organizations that are accustomed to creating that chaos.
Yep. Color revolution.
Yep. And so next time on, I think we'll be jumping up to episode 12 on the next podcast episode. So we'll definitely touch base on some of the chaos that's ensued and who's injecting that into our great nation. But until then, great conversation on the Iran war and the wrap up and conclusion of this agreement. If anything is to sort of transpire negatively or positively from this, I'm sure we'll touch on it in the next few episodes. But until then, we'll see all you on the next episode of The Spark Show.
And one thing we learned from the Japanese, clean up after yourself.
Hey, man, thank you, Japanese.
Did you see that?
I did clean up their locker room after they were done.
That's crazy. Not the whole stadium section. Like, they were all. Did you see that?
No.
You got check out that video. It's crazy.
All right.
After the event is done, they're all picking up all their trash, separating recycling, just showing what the Japanese culture is all about.
Absolutely. And, don't forget, Americans, get out of the United States. Go and check out a culture like Japan and see the cleanliness that they experience and the lack of homelessness and how amazingly clean they keep their metropolitan cities like Tokyo, and what an amazing culture the Japanese have. A major amount of respect, dignity, and things that we should aspire to have here in the United States. And we seem to have forgotten some of those things.
Yep.
All righty. Well, we'll see everybody next time on The Spark Show.
God bless.